finding some time to attend this webinar. I'm happy to see all of you here. So I will straight away start today's presentation to save some time for discussions at the end. So the topic of today's presentation is, does wood-based electricity generation reduces GHG emissions? An exploration considering forest land holdings, harvestage and power plant capacities. This is a joint work in which I have collaborated with Dr. Gann at Texas A&M and Dr. Baylis at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, Yale University. And before I go further, I would like to ask all of you to feel free in asking questions during presentation. I would love to clarify doubts before moving ahead. So with this, let me come on to the second slide. This is a brief outline of my today's presentation. I have divided the entire presentation in 5 different sections. In the first section, I will introduce all of you to all those factors which motivated us to undertake this research. In the second section, I will talk about methods that we adopted to successfully complete this research. In the third section, I will talk about our results, the most interesting section. In the fourth section, I will discuss all results one by one. And finally, in the last section, I will conclude this study. So before going into the details of my today's presentation, I would like to summarize all my major findings. We found that average size of forest land holding significantly affects overall GHG emissions of a power plant. We are finding that as the size of forest land holding increases, the overall GHG emission for a given power plant capacity goes down. We are also finding that an increase in feedstock density, that is metric tons of feedstock available per hectare of forest land, helps in reducing overall GHG emissions of a power plant. This means that overall GHG emissions are low for a power plant which utilizes both logging residues and pulpwood as a feedstock, relative to a power plant which only utilizes logging residue as a feedstock. Additionally, we are finding that an increase in harvestage is directly proportional to the overall GHG emissions from a power plant. This is mostly due to the fact that the availability of small diameter timber products, especially logging residues and pulpwood, decreases as the plantation age goes up. And finally, we have found that there are some instances where overall GHG emission per unit of electricity generated from a forest biomass-based power plant are significantly higher than a relative coal-based power plant. So this implies that an implicit assumption that bioenergy is always carbon neutral or carbon positive is not always correct. We need to be careful about this particular assumption. So with this, there is a message from Leslie. Okay, so I hope everybody is fine in terms of voice. So let me go on to the first section of my presentation, which is introduction. So the United States emitted about 6,822 million metric tons of greenhouse gases in 2010, out of which about 87% came because of energy-related activities. Electricity generation contributed 39% of all energy-related GHG emissions in 2010. This implies that electricity generation alone contributed about 34% of all GHG emissions at the national level in 2010, which is a big number. So in order to reduce carbon footprint of the power sector, several incentives have been announced by federal and state governments to generate electricity using various renewable sources, including biomass. The most prominent among all such initiatives is Renewable Portfolio Standards. As you can see from this slide, that so far only 29 states have adopted these standards. It is interesting to see that southern states have still not adopted renewable portfolio standards of any kind. In addition to renewable portfolio standards, 2 other major policy initiatives are helping renewable electricity generation at the national level. The first one is Renewable Electricity Production Tax Credit, and the second one is Investment Tax Credit. Due to these incentives, it is projected that the peak generation capacity of the biomass-based electricity will increase from 11.5 to about 50 billion kilowatt hour between 2010 to 2035. This is an increase of about 13% each year for next 26 years, which is quite a lot of growth. Now, let us take a pause and see where we stand now in terms of biomass-based electricity generation at the national level. Currently, there are 103 or 103 biomass-based power plants spread across 22 states with a combined generation capacity of 2,266 megawatts. The capacity of these power plants ranges from 1 megawatt to 80 megawatt, but majority of these power plants, like almost 90%, have a generation capacity of 40 megawatt or less. So it means that currently whatever power plants which are based on biomass are present, they are of mostly small, they are mostly small capacity power plants like 40 megawatts or less, or maximum like 50 megawatts, except one or two which are like 80 megawatt. So it is quite likely that biomass obtained from forest lands of the country along with biomass obtained from agricultural lands will play an important role in meeting the overall demand of the biomass for a projected increase in biomass-based electricity generation at the national level. For example, Perlak et al. In 2005, in their famous report, have reported that total forest biomass will be about 27% of all the biomass available at the national level for bioenergy development. However, out of about 3.04 million square kilometer of total forest land in the country, about 1.7 million square kilometer, more than half actually, are under private ownership. These private forest landowners harvested about 91% of total removals from the growing stock at the national level in 2006. This clearly indicates that private forest landowners will be critical in supplying needed quantities of forest biomass for electricity generation at the national level. Moreover, at the national level, about 67% of total forest land under private ownership is owned by non-industrial private forest landowners. Recently, and this is like most recent happening which is going on right now, several major industrial private forest landowners have considerably reduced their forest land holdings. As a result of which, this clearly indicates that the importance of NIPF owners in meeting the current and future demand of forest biomass for electricity generation at the national level will increase further, in fact, several times. Now, this is very important and very interesting slide that I want to highlight here. Let us take a look on NIPF landowners and what is going on with their forest land holdings at the national level. So we found that most interesting things are happening with those NIPF landowners who own 100 acres or less. This is a table that we have made after drawing data from three sources which are mentioned below. And few things first. As you can see, I have distinguished this entire table into two different sections. The first section, which is box, is for those landowners who have a land holding of 100 acres or less. And the bottom one are those NIPF landowners who have a forest land holding of 100 acres or more. So as you can see, in both these cases, total forest land under each of these landowners has increased starting from 1993, and also number of owners owning these parcels have also increased. For example, the total land under NIPF area for less than 100 acre category was 548,000 acres in 1993, but it has increased in 2006 to about 125, or let's say 126,000 acres, million acres. So, and same phenomenon is observed at the bottom. But, and if you see overall at the bottommost row, the total area of forest land area with NIPF has also gone up. It was only 232 million acres in 1993, but in 2006 it has gone up to 328 million acres. And similarly, considerable increase has been noticed for total number of landowners who are owning these forest parcels. I know this table is a little bit, so in order to simplify things and in order to make the point, I have divided this thing into two graphs. So let us talk about forest land areas first. The percentage of total forest land area occupied by NIPF owners having less than 100 acres or less of forest land has gone down in recent years. As you can see, they had only 38% of all forest land belonging to NIPF owners in 2006, related to 49% in 1993. And now let us see the numbers. This number is almost constant, 94%. So in terms of total number of NIPF landowners who have 100 acres or less, their number in terms of all the NIPF landowners has not changed. It is 94% in 2006, and it was 94% in 1993. But their land, out of total land which is with NIPF landowners, has gone down significantly. So this clearly indicates, as you can see from here, that the average land holding size for NIPF landowners who have 100 acres or less has gone down. As you can see from here, it was like 5.27 hectares per NIPF landowner in 1993, but in 2006 I calculated it and I got the value of 4.9 hectares per NIPF landowner who has 100 acres or less. So definitely there is a big dynamics which is going on in terms of average forest land holding with the NIPF landowner. And just to make another point which is not mentioned here, that the average NIPF forest land holding for those landowners who have 100 acres or more has gone up in recent years. It was 25 hectares in 1993, but it is in 2006, based on the data that we have, it is close to 28 hectares. So there is a big dynamics going on. So more number of people are having less and less average acres, and less number of people are having more and more number of total forest land area. So as you can see, there is a big shift which is going on right now. So there are some existing studies which focus on electricity generation from forest biomass. For example, Kumar et al. In 2003 have mentioned that large capacity power plants could help in reducing unit costs of electricity generated from forest biomass as the capital cost goes down with an increase in power plant capacity. Similarly, GAN 2007 analyzed economics of utilizing logging residues for bioenergy production in the United States. It was found that a large capacity power plant can help in reducing per unit cost of electricity generated. So these two studies clearly indicate that a high likelihood exists where future biomass-based power plants will be of large capacities. However, both these studies do not take a comprehensive approach towards GHG emissions related with the use of forest biomass for electricity generation. Now, there are some studies which do consider GHG emissions related with the use of forest biomass for electricity generation. For instance, Met Center for Conservation Science came up with a study in 2007 where they have mentioned that a significant period exists before any carbon benefit can be gained while generating electricity from forest biomass. However, some studies have reported immediate carbon benefits, including my own study which was published in Bioenergy Research in 2011. These differences are mostly because of the different assumptions that are made by researchers. However, if you look all these studies very carefully, a careful look into existing literature suggests that no study has yet analyzed the impact of changes in the sizes of forest land holdings on the overall GHG emissions, and that is the biggest factor which motivated us to undertake this research. So in order to fill this critical literature gap, we decided to focus on two research objectives. The first one was to analyze impact of forest land holdings, harvestage and feedstock types on the overall GHG emissions, and then to estimate relative savings in GHG emissions with respect to a comparative coal-based power plant. So these are the two objectives, and now I will jump to my second section of presentation, which is methods. So first of all, we selected slashpan as a reference species. We used Yin et al. 1998 growth and need model to estimate availability of different timber products at various plantation ages. There were 5 different steps present in the system boundary. These steps are also mentioned on the slide. The first step is biomass production. The second step is transporting harvested biomass from surrounding forest land to a wood pellet plant. We assume that the wood pellet plant is located in the center of a woodshed. The third step is to produce wood pellets. Fourth step is to transport wood pellets from the wood pellet plant to a nearby power plant using railroads. We took a distance of 350 kilometers between wood pellet plant and the power plant. Finally, the fifth step is to burn wood pellets to produce electricity. Now, this is like a very comprehensive approach that we have taken. So in order to analyze the total global warming impact of electricity generation, we created 3,960 scenarios by varying following parameters: biomass production with and without fertilizer application, harvestage from year 8 to year 40 in steps of a year, 3 forest land holdings, 10 hectares, 20 hectares and 40 hectares, 2 feedstock types, logging residues and pulpwood only, and finally we varied capacity of power plant from 10 megawatt to 100 megawatt in steps of 10 megawatt. So we analyzed all these scenarios one by one to come out with our findings. Please note that the logging residues contained unmerchantable small diameter biomass, dead biomass, and branches. So there are three components of logging residues: unmerchantable small diameter biomass, dead biomass, and branches. So first we calculated total amount of wood pellets required for a given power plant capacity. So we used a value of 70.8% for capacity utilization factor based on the average capacity utilization of coal power plants in the United States. For conversion efficiency, we used steam cycle efficiencies reported in Bridgewater et al. In their 2002 study for different capacities of power plant. And this particular study is very interesting because they have mentioned that the smaller is the capacity of a power plant, the lower is the conversion efficiency, and which makes sense if we see the real-time data. So for example, if I remember it correctly, for a 10 megawatt power plant, the conversion efficiency was reported as 20%, and for a 100 megawatt power plant, the capacity is reported as 31% or 32%, and there is a progressive increase as you go up in terms of power plant capacity. And similarly, we used a value of 18.5 megajoule per kg for the calorific value for wood pellets. Once we had the value of total wood pellets required, we calculated total biomass needed to produce required wood pellets using second equation, which is mentioned at the bottom. The moisture content of wood pellet was taken as 5%. The moisture content of slash pine was taken as 69% on dry basis, and percentage of bark was taken as 18%. So, and as I have already mentioned that we are assuming that wood pellet plant is located in the center of the woodshed, right? So once we had this information of how much wood pellets is needed, how much biomass is needed to produce that much amount of wood pellet, we calculated how many square forest plots will be needed to get sufficient biomass for the wood pellet production by using topmost equation, which is mentioned on this site. Here, bio unit is the biomass available for electricity production in metric tons per hectare, and LH size stands for average forest land holding in hectares. The value of, this is important actually, the value of bio unit depends upon the age of plantation at which harvesting takes place, and also the type of timber products that are being considered for wood pellet production. And since we are assuming that we are only going to utilize two types of feedstocks, that is logging residues and logging residues in combination with pulpwood, so there are like only two feedstocks that we are talking about. So as mentioned before, we have assumed that, again I am emphasizing because this is really important, that wood pellet plant is located in the center of a square woodshed. So the side length of this woodshed, which is denoted by W side, was determined using equation in the middle. We rounded the value of WS side to the nearest greatest integer and then square it to ascertain total number of forest parcel present in the woodshed. After assigning the middle square forest plot to the wood pellet plant, we estimated Euclidean distances between the wood pellet plant and other forest parcels present in the woodshed individually and then multiplied them by 1.5. This multiplication was necessary to take care of impact of local terrain on the distance between 2 points, because generally when we talk about forestry, there is no straight distance, roads are there, you have to build sometimes your own road. So we have taken a value of 1.5 in order to account for those extra distances. And then we also assume that an owner of the power plant, we also assume that the owner of the wood pellet plant will try to reduce the total transportation distance. We also, and this guy, the owner of the wood pellet plant, will source from surrounding forest parcels unless and until the total requirement of forest biomass is satisfied. So this way we have calculated that the total distance that will be traveled to source required forest biomass under each scenario. So like I know it's a little bit overwhelming in just a short span of time. So this is a brief overview what basically we are trying to do. So first we assume that the wood pellet plant is located in the center of a woodshed, and woodshed is a square, and all the forest parcels which are present in that woodshed are also square. So we have calculated individual distances of each forest plot from the wood pellet plant, which is located in the center of a particular woodshed. So then based on our optimization criteria, the wood pellet plant owner will try to source required amount of biomass from surrounding forest lands one by one, unless until the condition that he has sufficient biomass satisfies. And this, for example, just to give you a hint, that right now, let's say each forest parcel is 10 hectares, and once you increase your forest land holding size, each forest plot, let's say, becomes 40 hectares. So each forest parcel is comprised of small units of forest land holdings which are of a hectare size. So it means that for a 40 hectare forest parcel, there will be 40 hectares inside one forest parcel. And then based on your growth and model, you calculate, you know that how many tons of biomass available per hectare, and you multiply it by 40 to find out how much biomass is available for a 40 hectare forest parcel. So then after this thing is over, we followed the standard life cycle analysis guidelines to assess overall GHG emissions for each scenario. The functional unit was selected as a unit of electricity, and because in this study we have not considered any soil carbon and also no emissions related with biogenic carbon. So now coming on to the results, which is third section of our presentation and hopefully most interesting. So the availability of different timber products at various plantation ages is shown in figure here. We found that the availability of logging residue was higher in a fertilized plantation for initial 9 years of plantation than in an unfertilized plantation. However, this situation reverses from 10th year onwards. The availability of pulpwood from a fertilized plantation was higher for initial 15 years of plantation relative to an unfertilized plantation, and thereafter the availability of pulpwood for an unfertilized plantation was found higher than a fertilized plantation. Together, the availability of pulpwood and logging residue was greater for initial 14 years in a fertilized plantation relative to an unfertilized plantation. So the figures or graphs reported here satisfy what we really, what is the actual behavior, that if you put fertilizer, the growth in big diameter or large diameter forest products is more relative to small diameter timber products, and as a result of which you see some differences in terms of availability of feedstock for bioenergy production, especially when you are only considering that we are going to use logging residues and pulpwood for bioenergy production. Now, based on our calculation, this is the distribution of wood and wood pellets required for different power plant capacities. As expected, requirement of wood and wood pellets increase with a rise in power plant capacity. There is a question raised by Dr. Martin that these graphs look identical to me, and I completely agree with him that based on Inlet all model, we found that there is not big difference in terms of availability of timber products, especially pulpwood and logging residue, when we talk about the condition where we have fertilizer and we don't have a fertilization.
Thanks, Puneet.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The only difference, because I played with the model, is that the big difference that makes that you use fertilizer and you don't use fertilizer. It's not big difference. But if you don't use fertilizer and also you don't do herbicide treatment, then there is a big difference of biomass availability. This slide is done, and this is very interesting that we found that in order to satisfy our optimization criteria, the wood pellet plant owners are sourcing biomass from those forest parcels which are in a circle. So this radius, like this is a small demonstration, this is not a real one. I just wanted to highlight that most of these, like in all the scenarios, we found that all wood pellet plant owners are sourcing biomass from surrounding parcels, and that too in a fixed particular radius. Since we had a square plot, so it is not a typical radius or a typical circle, but overall I think we get the idea. And this is very interesting actually. We found that this radius was almost similar for all forest land holdings for a given feedstock type, harvest year, and power plant capacity. However, radius increases with the capacity of a power plant for a given forest land holding, feedstock type, and harvest year. It is also very interesting to see that fertilization does not play any significant role in determining this radius. I just mentioned why, because we never saw any big differences in terms of availability of biomass in presence or absence of fertilizer. Moreover, we also found that for the same harvest stage, the maximum radius is less for the condition when both logging residues and pulpwood are used as a feedstock. So just to give a perspective, let us see here. So here in this case, what we are doing, we are utilizing both logging residues and pulpwood. And as you can see, the maximum distance, below which you are going to source biomass from all the forest parcels is like about 4.5. But the same thing, when you are only utilizing logging residue, the maximum distance from where you are going to source your biomass goes till like 8ish. So it means that the higher the feedstock density is, the better you are, because then you have to travel less in order to source the same amount of biomass. And as you can see, as the power plant capacity goes up, at the bottom here you see like this is 10 megawatt, then it goes up for 10 hectare power plant. You have to travel more. And the distance is also dependent upon harvest cycle, because I have already mentioned that your feedstock density goes down as you go up in terms of age of plantation. So like if you want to harvest your plantation year 40, definitely you have to travel more because your feedstock density is less. So it means that, for example, so it directly implies that higher the feedstock density, better you are in terms of total distance traveled. These are now here is these are the GHG emissions. So these are GHG emissions which are related with wood pellet production and wood pellet transportation. So as you can see again, these are linear functions of power plant capacity. The higher the power plant capacity is, the more you are going to emit these type of emissions. And most importantly, these emissions are independent of harvest size or harvest age, forest land holding, and whatnot. And also fertilization application, because they are those emissions which you have to incur to transform your biomass into wood pellets. So once you have your biomass at the wood pellet plant, you are not concerned how that biomass was transported or how it was produced. You have biomass, you have to convert it into wood pellets. So you are independent of all those decisions which were taken before or outside your wood pellet mill. Similarly, it goes for wood pellet transportation. If you have wood pellets, you have to transport those wood pellets to a nearby power plant, which is 350 kilometers from your wood pellet plant, and that's it. So that is why you have less emissions, or these emissions are independent of all the variables that we have accounted for in this particular study. So now coming on to another interesting slide, slide number 28, which is total GHG emissions. And here, I will go really slow because this, I think, is the most critical slide of this presentation, is that this slide reveals that a total GHG emission related with the given power plant capacity goes down as the size of the forest holding increases. It also says that an increase in feedstock availability on per unit area helps in reducing overall GHG emissions. This is due to the fact that the overall GHG emissions is always less when both logging residues and pulpwood were used as feedstock rather than only logging residues. It also suggests that with the rise in harvest age, overall GHG emissions rises. This is again due to the fact that the availability of small diameter timber products falls with a rise in plantation age. As a result, more area needs to be harvested to meet the total biomass demand, and also, as I have mentioned in that radius slide, you have to travel some more distance to source required amount of biomass. So again, let me take a break here and explain this thing here in more detail. So these are three types of forest land holdings: 10 hectares, 20 hectares, and 40 hectares. So based on feedstock density, metric tons per hectare, you have less for the same harvest age. You have less amount of biomass for 10 hectares, you have more for 20 hectares, and you have maximum at the 40 hectares, right? Because there are 40 hectares, you multiply it by metric tons per hectare, so you have more amount of biomass that you can go, take it, come back to the wood pellet mill. So as a result of which, what is happening? First of all, you are traveling less. You are going to less number of forest parcels to gain same amount of biomass. Plus, what is happening? You are also not only traveling less, you are also saving emissions, because the more you travel, the more GHG emissions related with transportation. And this point will be clear in the next slide as well. And also one more thing is that here you should see that I have reported results for 10 megawatt, 50 megawatt and 100 megawatt power plant. I have all the results for all other power plants starting from 10 megawatts to 100 megawatts. But since for reporting purposes, it is not possible to put all 10 power plants in the same slide. So just I am demonstrating all these, only 3 power plants. But if somebody interested, I can share my original data, original result data with the person. And very interestingly, as I have also mentioned in the text, that as you can see, there is a curve. So if you have 40 hectares of forest land and you want to harvest at 40, age 40, and use those logging residues and pulpwood obtained at age 40 to generate wood pellets, definitely your emissions will be a bit higher than if you have harvested your plantation at year 16 or 15, let's say, because you have feedstock density is more in year 15 related to year 40. And like this is very interesting that as I have like impact of fertilizer is very less. Both these lines, they overlap substantially, especially if you are talking about large forest land holdings. And again, just to highlight the transportation point, this is only the result for 100 megawatt power plant, and this shows the distribution of different emissions for different forest land holdings. So and this is only with fertilizer. So as you can see, if you are using only logging residues at the top with 10 hectare forest land holdings, so emissions go down as your forest land holding increases, and most of these emissions are going down because you are traveling less and less, because this blue column goes down substantially. Again, if you see when you are using both logging residues and pulpwood, again similar trend is observed. And this slide also highlights a very important point, that based on your judgment that when you want to harvest, and also based on your surrounding forest landscape, it is very important to see that relative percentages of all these emissions are changing. For example, if you have a wood pellet plant which is surrounded by 40 hectare forest parcels, then your maximum percentage will be not as high for transportation as compared to when you have only 10 hectares of forest parcels surrounding a wood pellet. So we, like somebody say, I have seen some reports that they say that we just need to focus on transportation for bioenergy, this and that. But I think that based on this graph, it will be good to focus on all of these points of emission instead of just focusing. But yeah, I also agree that transportation is a major one, but it will be good if we can, focus on all these types of emissions or point of emission at the same time. Now coming on to the discussions, this is again related GHG emissions, and this slide clearly indicates that as the power plant and this is relative to a coal fire power plant, and I am assuming coal fire power plant is burning bituminous coal, because that is like 90% of coal production in this country is bituminous. So if you want to produce electricity from bituminous, the total emissions that we have is like 1.08 kg of CO2 equivalent per unit of electricity produced, or per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. So I have compared all the GHG emissions that I have got from here. I have converted those GHG emissions to kilowatt hour, like kg CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. And then I have taken that value and compared that value with coal emission value to find out net savings in GHG emissions. So what I am finding is very interesting here. So this slide clearly reveals that as the power plant capacity increases for a given forest land holding, the relative savings in GHG emissions go down with respect to an equivalent coal-fired power plant. However, the relative savings in GHG emissions increases with a rise in forest land holding for a given power plant capacity. We also found that all scenarios where logging residues were used as a feedstock had less relative GHG savings compared to the scenarios where both logging residues and pulpwood were used as a feedstock. Relative GHG savings were found more sensitive to changes in harvest stage than to the use of fertilizers for biomass production. And just to give you an idea that here I have not used negative values. So you can see, there is a big change if we go talk about relative savings. So coming on to the overall thing. So if we talk about overall GHG emissions, it becomes absolutely clear that small capacity power plants are always carbon positive. Relative savings are much higher relative to a coal-fired power plant. But when we talk about large capacity power plants, we have to be careful. They might be positive, they might be negative based on for type of forest land holdings that from where they are sourcing their biomass, and also based on harvestage and whatnot. So an implicit assumption that bioenergy is always good when it comes to carbon neutrality, does not stand true. So whenever we are talking about carbon neutrality of biomass, a little cautious approach is required. And also, we found that these 5 factors impact the overall GHG emissions in decreasing order of magnitude. Our analysis indicates that forest land holdings play a very, very important role in determining overall GHG emissions of a power plant. However, as mentioned before, this factor was not considered before this particular study by all other studies. So as a result of which we think that this is a significant contribution from our side to the existing literature in terms of our understanding of using forestry as a tool of climate change mitigation. And feedstock types is the second one, based on what type of feedstock you want to use. Logging residues for pulpwood, or everything which is coming from a hectare of forest land, your overall GHG emissions will change. Capacity of a power plant is also very important. Depending upon low or high, your emissions will change. Harvestage is important, but after 20 years, the importance of it goes down, especially when you want to utilize small diameter timber products. And finally, fertilizer application helps, but the impact is very negligible based on growth and yield model that we have. So I will say these 4 parameters are really important, which significantly affect the overall GHG emissions and hence relative savings in GHG emissions too. So overall sustainability, when I talk about, so there are some recommendations based on our work. First of all, an integrated planning approach is needed to make sure GHG emissions are achieved. And while I will suggest that when we are planning for a power plant, especially forest biomass-based power plant, we need to take care of all the sustainability indicators along with economic parameters in order to decide the feasibility of power plant capacity. And in terms of sustainability indicators, I am not only talking about GHG emissions. I am also interested in GHG. I am also interested in nutrient dynamics, and also definitely biodiversity conservation, because I have found in my previous publication that if large capacity power plants with a small forest land holdings, they will have also significant impact on the overall distribution of age classes in and around that particular power plant. And also, as we have demonstrated that these things are very important. Forest land holdings, average size. So some economic incentives for current forest landowners, which can help in avoiding forest land parcelization, will definitely help. And this avoidance is not only necessary for electricity generation, but as we all know that there is a big talk about cellulosic biofuels based on forest biomass. So definitely we have to be careful about that, because again, same problem will be there. If you are sourcing a lot of biomass from small forest parcels, then you have to travel more, you will emit more GHG emissions, and the whole concept of sustainability or reducing climate change because of biofuels might fall in trouble. And then finally, in the last section, there are some conclusions. So here the biggest limitations that we face, that we have not accounted for carbon sequestered in soil, and reason being that there are like 1 or 2 studies that we were able to locate, which have analyzed the carbon dynamics for like n number of rotation. First one is CO2 fixed model, and I found that the soil carbon, like I'm not an expert, but whatever is in the literature, it rises really fast in initial some years of plantation, and then it stabilizes, and then it doesn't change a lot. So in our study, we are making assumption that forest lands are being used for forestry purposes for n number of rotations. So the net impact of soil carbon will be very less in our case. And also, when we talk about carbon, above ground carbon, especially carbon related with silviculture practices, again, that carbon also shows cyclic, nature. So what we thought it is, since we don't have any concrete information, so it will be good just to avoid that type of, carbon dynamics in our calculations, so as to make sure we don't confuse anybody and just we have our absolute numbers. And also, second point which is very important right now is that the estimates that we are talking about, these are best estimates, because we know that forest landowners do a lot of things, and we are assuming that all forest landowners which are in and around that wood pellet mill are willing to sell their biomass to the wood pellet plant owner and whatnot. So, and I'm pretty sure this is not going to be the case in the future. So these are the best estimates that we are getting, and based on calculations and whatnot. So we have to get new values for the new power plants, and these new values will be very local in nature, because everywhere you are not going to have flash pine. If you want to produce, let's say, biopower in Kentucky, or you want to produce in Ohio, or you want to go to northern Wisconsin, definitely things will change. So we need more local level studies to make sure that the all objective of producing electricity from forest biomass or cellulosic biofuels should not defeat the purpose of GHG reduction. And also in this study, we have not taken any economic and ecological impacts, and that could be another extension of this particular analysis. And since my background is forest policy and economics, so from that perspective, there is a principle which is a very popular principle in forest policy and economics, that we call it precautionary principle, where it is approach which states that if an action or policy has a suspected risk of causing harm to the public or to the environment, in the absence of scientific consensus that the action or policy is harmful, the burden of proof that it is not harmful falls on those taking the action. So again, just to emphasize the point that I've already made, that we have to do similar type of analysis at a local level to make sure that we are not harming environment, and environment not only in GHG emissions but also in terms of biodiversity and also in terms of nutrient dynamics. So so we have to take a comprehensive approach. And again, finally, implicit assumption is that just to finalize everything, is that we assume that bioenergy is always carbon neutral. But again, we have to be careful, because carbon neutrality will differ from state to state, county to county, based on your power plant capacity, forest parcel, average size of forest parcel around that particular facility, and transportation and whatnot. And I think, yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening to me, and I'm open to any questions that you have.
Hey, Puneet, it's Tim. I really appreciate you taking a nuanced approach